以上満足だ。
Bōken Jidai Katsugeki Goemon is a PlayStation 2 3D action RPG that was published by Konami on December 21st, 2000, making it a very early title in the PS2 library. It was the company's first of two attempts to reimagine its legendary Ganbare Goemon franchise, transforming the IP's lighthearted, silly, and comedic tone to one that's more serious and epic, yet still manages to maintain some of its lightheartedness. Development was handled by KCEK, Konami Computer Entertainment Kobe, a short-lived Konami development team that produced the Castlevania games on the N64 and Castlevania Circle of the Moon and Konami Crazy Racers for the Game Boy Advance. They also worked on several Goemon games, including the Game Boy Color's Seikushi Dynamite's Arawaru, and many of their employees had quite a bit of experience with the series, as they had come over from Konami Computer Entertainment Osaka, which made the fan favorites Mystical Ninja starring Goemon and Goemon's Great Adventure. While Bōken Jidai Katsugeki Goemon features many of the beloved characters and tropes of the Ganbare Goemon games, it is set in an alternate universe and feels more like a spin-off rather than a reboot or something directly connected to the main series. The result is an interesting, if not divisive title among fans that also shares another thing in common with most other Ganbare Goemon titles. It never left its native Japan. However, it could have, would have, and should have back in the earlier mid-2000s, as it was pretty much fully translated, localized, and ready to hit North American markets at the time, courtesy of famed publisher Working Designs. In an extremely disappointing and bewildering move, Sony of America flat out refused to allow the game to go to retail, causing the publisher's downfall, and the project was lost and never to be played. Until 2021, when an English prototype of the game was released to the public thanks to hiddenpalace.org and a number of actors, which is in a completely playable form that can be enjoyed from beginning to end. So, what's the story behind the cancellation of Bōken Jidai Katsugeki Goemon's North American release, and in turn the end of Working Designs? Well, the whole fascinating tale is told in great detail over at Hidden Palace, so I highly recommend you check out their write-up there, but since you're here now, here's the short version. While Working Designs enjoyed considerable financial success from their PS1 offerings, such as the critically acclaimed RPG classics Lunar 1 and 2, they ran into a string of unfortunate events in the PS2 era which affected the stability of the company as a whole. The largest influencing factor for this was Sony Computer Entertainment America and its rigid certification process for licensing software in their market for the 6th gen console. Working Designs had secured the rights to publish several Japanese games in North America early on for the PlayStation 2, one of them being Bōken Jidai Katsugeki Goemon. Konami rarely, if ever, allowed other companies to publish their titles, so this was a really big deal for Working Designs, and aside from the financial incentives, it was a personal project for company president Victor Ireland, who felt the Ganbare Goemon series had never gotten a decent localization in North America and wanted to remedy that. In 2002, Working Designs officially announced that they were planning on releasing the game in English, dubbing it Mystical Ninja Goemon, and heavily promoted it at their booth at E3 that year, even giving out special promo merch to convention goers such as this Goemon plush doll. Oh my god, he's so cool. While on the surface it seemed everything was on track for a smooth localization, behind the scenes, Sony of America had actually rejected the company's request to publish Mystical Ninja Goemon in the region, along with two other games they were working on, Growlancer 2 and 3. Regarding their decision with the latter two, it was mainly because they were 2D games. However, with Goemon, it might have been due to a number of factors, including what SCEA considered lackluster gameplay or graphics. Though stuck in certification hell, Working Designs continued to translate the game, making tweaks and improvements to it that should have made certification more likely. They'd spend the next couple of years mainly focused on getting the Growlancer titles released, which they reluctantly had to combine into one package, resulting in lost revenue. It finally came out at the end of 2004, the long strenuous process taking its toll on the small publisher, and so in 2005 they needed a hit to recuperate. With Mystical Ninja Goemon just about ready to go, they submitted it to Sony again for review, and history repeated itself. Sadly, this rejection would be the final knockout blow to end Working Designs, which closed its doors in December of 2005, marking the end of a 20-year run in the game publishing business, truly the end of an era. That's a bit on the background behind Bōken Jidai Katsugeki Goemon's doomed international release. As mentioned earlier, you really should read the article on Hidden Palace to get the full picture, as well as learn about the people and the process involved in acquiring this unique prototype and getting it into our grateful hands. You can download the game there or from a variety of places on the net, free of charge of course, and experience the game right now. While you may have trouble running it on an emulator, I can confirm from my own experience that the ROM runs just fine on real hardware using the Memcard Pro 2 from 8-Bit Mods right here. No PS1 or PS2 fan should be without this, in my humble PlayStation-loving opinion. The title screen adds a 0 to the end of Mystical Ninja Goemon, and while game text is in English, the extensive voiceover work remains in Japanese, and that's probably for the best with this particular game in its setting. We'll take a brief look at the localization as well as some of the more substantial changes from working designs a little later on, so for now, let's jump into the actual game itself.
それなら拙者が案内するでござる。こっちへ来るでござる。
Booting it up for the first time, the player is treated to a slick anime intro that features fast action and epic battles over a rocking music track, pumping you up in anticipation for the upcoming game experience. It's quite similar to the other Goemon reimagining, Shinserai Shumei for the PS1, even sharing the same vocalist for its rock and roll theme song. And while that game's intro fitted quite well due to its modern aesthetic and setting and relatively fast-paced gameplay, what's presented in the intro to Mystical Ninja Goemon Zero is completely at odds with the actual product, which is more slow-paced and narrative-driven, having more in common with a 3D Legend of Zelda than a hardcore action game. Starting up the adventure, a short cutscene plays where a mysterious warrior infiltrates Edo Castle under the cover of moonlight, thrusting an enormous sword into a magnificent stone in a courtyard, muttering to himself something about Byakko, the white tiger. After he's confronted by a squad of ninja, oh hey, it's Yae, he flees, leaving the player with more questions than answers, and setting the stage for a grand tale. You're then thrown straight into the game world and introduced to our protagonist, Goemon. Since this is an alternate take on Ganbare Goemon, he's not the spiky blue-haired, gutsy, daring, almost superhero that we're used to, but rather a spiky blue-haired, kind, wide-eyed child who lives with his adoptive parents in the small town of Haguremachi on the outskirts of Oedo. In the early stages of Mystical Ninja Goemon Zero, the player is free to explore a limited part of the town and get a feel for basic controls and gameplay, eventually stumbling upon what appears to be a stray cat in dire need of care. After fetching the poor thing some sustenance in the form of fresh fish, the rejuvenated animal takes a liking to the hero and begins to follow him around town. My god, isn't that just adorable? Goemon christens his new feline friend Kotora, which means little tiger. When he introduces Kotora to the wise man, Monoshiri Ji-san, who in this game is quite respectable and not the perverted old geezer he is in the main series, the old man recognizes the unique markings on his head and fur and realizes that the boy's companion is no ordinary kitty. He deduces that Kotora is the offspring of one of the great spirits, the guardian god of the west, Byakko, the white tiger. Lately, rumors have swirled of a great disruption in the west, and the wise man wonders if it might be the white tiger searching for his child, so he and Goemon decide that the best course of action is to find the great spirit and return the lost cub to his father. After bidding his own parents farewell, and receiving a set of stylish red duds that makes him look more like the hero we know and love, Goemon heads west on a journey to not only reunite Kotora with the white tiger, but to become more of a man. As mentioned earlier, Mystical Ninja Goemon Zero sort of resembles a 3D Legend of Zelda title, particularly Ocarina of Time, though it also shares similarities to another N64 title, and that's Superman 64. Nah, I'm just kidding, it's Mystical Ninja starring Goemon. It features field areas, towns, and dungeons that are part of an interconnected large open world, a fantasy version of medieval Japan. A majority of gameplay revolves around combat, which consists mainly of simple hack-and-slash controls using an equipped weapon. These weapons typically come in the form of traditional blades, clubs, axes, etc., though there are sillier items that can be used, as well as the series trademark giant smoking pipe. Other equipable items include restoratives such as rice balls and dumplings, single-use weapons such as shuriken and bombs, and crests that allow Goemon to perform all types of magic. In addition to raw attack values, weapons may also have additional effects such as inflicting elemental damage. There are no armor pieces or equipment to boost defense, and the only way to increase Goemon's base stats is by leveling up. Defeated enemies have a chance to drop an item, money, or experience points, often a combination of the three. Collecting enough experience points, and yes, you have to physically collect them, will level up Goemon, and from the pause menu you can distribute 5 points to 5 attributes of your choosing. Power, which governs melee attack power, Skill, which increases the swiftness of strikes, Strength, which adds to the HP pool, Mind, which does the same for the MP or Ki pool, and Luck, whose effect is not explicitly spelled out, but at the very least it likely increases enemy drops. Maybe critical attacks too? Nah, who knows. In addition, whether or not Goemon can even use weapons is dependent on all 5 stat values, giving the player another factor to consider when distributing points after leveling up. Kotora too can go up in levels by collecting experience, increasing his power when helping to take down enemies, either on his own or on command with a lock-on mechanic. After combat, platforming is the biggest gameplay component in Mystical Ninja Goemon Zero. Goemon can jump, double jump, hang off of and climb up ledges, shimmy on ledges, and perform a wall jump. Get used to wall jumping because it's an integral part of game progression and is featured in every dungeon and then some. Completing dungeons requires a combination of combat, platforming, and puzzle solving, and once again, the best comparison I can probably make is with The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, though you won't find any cool new tools, gadgets, or sub-weapons hidden within them. Boss fights are also a part of the dungeon equation, with each opponent typically sporting a gimmick or weak point that requires a unique approach to conquer. Aside from fields and dungeons, there are many towns both big and small throughout Japan that provide a respite from all the fighting and wall jumping. Well, usually. The most important place in town is arguably the inn, which provides the only place to save game progress outside of a few save points scattered about the land, usually before entering dungeons or boss fights. One can also recuperate health and key points at the inn, though snack and tea shops will also offer that service, some which are conveniently found on the road away from the urban sprawl. There are weapon shops where you can purchase new arms, often for very high prices, and you might meet a blacksmith who will take any junk parts picked up from enemies to synthesize into new, randomly selected weapons. If you're short on cash or want to do some inventory cleanup, the pawn shop will purchase unnecessary items from you. And of course, the general store provides all sorts of restorative items such as a variety of rice balls, which can be consumed at any time and are essential to any young Japanese man's survival. Kotora won't need any items as he's invincible. Something incredible must have been in that fish you fed him back in Hakuremachi. Or maybe it's because he's a god. Almost as soon as Goemon's journey to the west begins, it comes to a close when he meets the Great White Tiger fairly early on, returning Kotora to where the massive deity dwells. There he learns of the young cub's mission, to find the Earth Dragon, another great spirit whose life force grows faint, worrying the immobile white tiger. He offers some background into the great spirits and the mythological history of Japan, a story splendidly presented in a series of illustrated cutscenes. Storytelling and lore has never been deeper in a Ganbare Goemon title, and throughout the game, similar cutscenes will spin a tale that spans centuries in its scope. After hearing of Kotora's obligation and the uncertain status of the Earth Dragon, Goemon decides to go on a new journey, one where he will accompany Kotora to help him fulfill his destiny, and one which will become much larger than initially expected, taking the duo all across the many regions of Japan and beyond. Along the way, they'll run into an array of allies and villains, some new to the series, and other familiar faces to longtime Ganbare Goemon fans. Among these are Yae, the leader of Edo's secret special ninja squad seen in the opening cutscene, Ebisumaru, the lovable goof who is a member of Osaka's ninja squad, and Sasuke the mechanical robot, invention and companion to the Wise Man. While Goemon and Wise Man's personalities show some noticeable differences from their main series counterparts, the rest of the gang resemble their old selves for the most part, though there is some sprinkling of a potential romance between Goemon and Yae. Don't tell Omitsu. Though I mentioned it earlier, I'm sure you can already tell that the tone of Mystical Ninja Goemon Zero is quite serious, which is another big departure from the series it spun off from. In fact, you could fault the game for being too serious, as there are really only a handful of chuckle-worthy lines of dialogue or scenarios from beginning to end. Unsurprisingly, most of these involve Ibisumaru, though the zany antics of a gang of thieves also bring their share of comedic moments. Listen, I love a good serious story, and too much humor can lessen the impact of dramatic situations. However, given the style of this game and the series it's associated with, I just think it could have benefited from a little more playfulness. And related to playfulness, when I think of the Ganbare Goemon series, one word often comes to mind, and it starts with an F. Fun. When I think of Mystical Ninja Goemon Zero, I do think of some fun parts, however, another F word comes to mind before that, and hey, let's keep it clean. That word, unfortunately, is frustrating. Combat is the first thing that is likely to frustrate players. On its own, it's not a bad system, a bit simple but solid. The thing that makes it frustrating is the never-ending onslaught of enemies the game throws at you in a majority of places outside of town. In most areas out in the field and in some parts of dungeons, foes will respawn infinitely, which admittedly can be good for leveling up or collecting money and items. The problem with it is that there's no rhyme or reason to how they spawn, making just getting around some areas a chaotic mess, never giving you a chance to just breathe and take in your surroundings. So many enemy attack patterns mainly just focus on immediately heading toward and striking Goemon, and you're bound to get hit a lot, which makes keeping a large amount of rice balls on hand a requirement. Adding to the frustration with enemy spawns is that simply touching a hostile will cause damage to the player too, which makes using short-range weapons an exercise in that F word. Except for maybe one part near the end of the game, magic is not really important or necessary, and I imagine most players will skip it entirely in favor of leveling Goemon's melee attack abilities. Even more than combat, perhaps the most frustrating part of Mystical Ninja Goemon Zero is another major part of the game, the dungeons themselves. Things start off promising and fun enough with the first one, however what follows are some very oddly designed dungeons that are confusing and just not very fun or rewarding to get through. A clear difference from Ocarina of Time, which was clearly an influence of this game. And the same applies when comparing them to the wonderfully fun dungeons in Mystical Ninja starring Goemon. There are some segments you'll have to repeat over and over, either because the solutions are just unclear or you get knocked down and return to the beginning of an area or entrance point. I know that sounds like standard fare for a 3D action RPG. It's hard to explain and articulate exactly what I mean without forcing you to play the game. Judging solely by gameplay footage, it may not look so bad, but I'd be really surprised if most people don't feel exhausted at the overall dungeon layouts and designs by the third area. Kotora accompanies Goemon the entire journey. However, he's never really utilized for any puzzle solutions minus maybe a couple of highly scripted segments, and honestly he just kind of helps attack and pick up items. A shame and a waste. A real partner mechanic could have made the game a lot more interesting and added to the bond between boy and Tiger Cub God. If beaten by a boss, you'll have to restart at the last save point and rewatch any cutscenes that preceded the fight, and trust me, there are plenty and they can be quite long. A lot of dungeons overly rely on wall jumping, which is mainly only a problem because of the clunky way it feels and is implemented, and the camera tends to get in the way and screw you up halfway. No lie, at the end of nearly every dungeon and boss battle, I thought, thank God I never have to do this again. With Ganbare Goemon, those words have only ever entered my mind for what I consider the worst games in the series. The art direction and illustration work is excellent, and Goemon Zero is a colorful game. However, as an early PS2 release, it certainly shows in the graphics department, particularly with bland-looking character models. Except for Kotora, he looks super cute and has excellent animation. Only the humans look kind of lame. The music is actually quite great, if not very memorable, especially compared to the extremely catchy tunes the Ganbare Goemon series is known for. Finally, one last thing about this game that is frustrating is that, besides all the things just mentioned, there's something about it fundamentally that just misses the mark. This reimagining and repackaging of Ganbare Goemon had so much potential, and seeing that extremely well produced intro helps get the imagination going, but at the end of the day, the game feels like so much more was planned that never made the cut. This is probably due to budgetary restraints or development deadlines, or maybe it was a lack of familiarity with the new and notoriously difficult to develop for PS2 hardware. That's not to say there's a lack of content, as the main game lasts about 12 to 15 hours, longer if you continue post-game and try to collect any missing items and weapons, and the ending is not unsatisfying. A part of me can respect that Konami tried to take the Goemon series in a different direction, likely to elevate it to the level of some of its more lucrative and blockbuster properties, though in my opinion, Mystical Ninja Goemon Zero was not the way to do it, at least in the form it was released. The original Japanese version was heavily criticized for having many bugs and unintuitive controls, unfortunately. With this prototype version, Working Designs fixed a lot of the bugs and tightened up controls and user navigation to make for a much better experience. Among the most major of these tweaks is the camera system, which has been completely overhauled to give the player way more freedom in how to view the action. While this can sort of break a few of the set pieces in the game that implement a forced perspective, it's such a big, welcome improvement that makes it hard to go back to the Japanese-style camera. Item use and menu navigation have been streamlined better, and certain button assignments have been swapped to make controls less frustrating, particularly when pulling oneself up ledges. The original money cap of 9,999 ryo has been lifted, which is quite nice because money is so plentiful in Goemon Zero, and you're likely to surpass that amount early on. Working Designs is criticized by some for the localizations due to the amount of references to pop culture and current events they'd include, as well as shoehorned in humor not found in the original script. Well, there's pretty much none of that here, and the English script is very well polished and faithful, though there are some inconsistencies in names here and there. Additionally, there's one small line of dialogue I found that's still in Japanese, a couple of lines that lack any text translation, problems with the timing and matching of text to what's spoken, and there are quite a few instances where text will spill out of text boxes, something that happens more in later sections of the game than in the beginning. Nothing that majorly hinders understanding or enjoyment of the story, and since this is a prototype, these were things that would have been caught and remedied in final testing had Mystical Ninja Goemon Zero been given the okay by Sony back in the early 2000s. Whatever your feelings about the actual translations and localizations from Working Designs in the past, you can't deny the passion and effort they put into their projects. At the very least, you have to respect that they introduced so many people in the 80s and 90s to games from across the Pacific that they otherwise would have probably never had the chance to play back then, as most big publishers refused to touch Japanese games that were considered just too niche to make a profit in Western markets. For me personally, I will forever be grateful to Victor Ireland and the team at Working Designs for giving me the opportunity to play so many gems when I was just a video game obsessed kid. Many thanks to my family too for buying them for me. The other attempt to considerably change up the Ganbare Goemon series took place roughly a year after this game's initial release, in late 2001 and early 2002, with the futuristic soft reboots Goemon Shinserai Shumei for the PS1 and Goemon New Age Shutsuro for the Game Boy Advance, two games I've already made videos on. The approaches to modifying the tried and true formula of the main series were quite different for both projects, but something they have in common is that both were ultimately unsuccessful. In Japan, Mystical Ninja Goemon Zero, or Bōken Jidai Katsugeki Goemon, got a couple of extra best hits runs, had a couple of video game guides published for it, and really not much else. While I vastly prefer the look and feel of your standard Ganbare Goemon title over Mystical Ninja Goemon Zero, I would have liked to have seen a follow-up or a similar, more successful attempt to see the series grow up. As is, if I were to rank Mystical Ninja Goemon Zero within the context of the entire series, I'd say it's on the lower end, but near the middle. It's not a terrible game, it actually has a lot of heart regarding the characters, and the core story is interesting enough. Again, it's just pretty frustrating. And maybe an even worse F-word, a bit forgettable overall. Also, there's no Goemon impact, which is the biggest travesty of them all. What the hell were they thinking? Anyway, once again, thank you to the people at Hidden Palace and everyone else who had a hand in making this prototype public, and an even bigger thanks to Working Designs. I wish they and Mystical Ninja Goemon Zero had met a better ending so many years ago. Hey there, thank you for watching. If you made it this far, then I assume you enjoyed the video. I can assume, right? If so, you'd do me a big favor by hitting the like button, leaving a comment, and sharing it with someone you think also might enjoy it. It really does help push the video out to more people on YouTube. And if you want to go the extra mile, I hope you'll consider supporting through Patreon or a channel membership. Thanks again, and I'll see you again soon.